The Senate chamber was supposed to be a place of measured debate, but on this day it exploded into chaos. As senators settled in for yet another long session, a single voice suddenly shattered the calm. Ted Cruz, eyes locked on Bernie Sanders across the aisle, erupted with a shout that stunned everyone in the room. The words echoed against the marble walls, forcing every head to turn. "Enough of your lies, Bernie!" Cruz bellowed, his voice ricocheting through the chamber like a cannon blast. Gasps spread through the room as cameras snapped to attention, broadcasting the moment live across the nation. What had begun as a routine discussion of economic policy now ignited into one of the most heated personal clashes ever seen on the Senate floor. Within seconds, social media feeds lit up. Clips of Cruz's scream began circulating before the debate was even over. Journalists leapt from their seats, fingers flying across keyboards, capturing the eruption in real time. The spectacle wasn't just a clash of two senators. It was a political earthquake shaking the core of Washington. The Senate floor had witnessed countless fiery exchanges before, but rarely had it reached this level of raw intensity. The opening salvo from Cruz wasn't calculated diplomacy. It was rage, unfiltered and unrestrained, directed squarely at a man he saw as the embodiment of everything wrong with America's progressive movement. Across the aisle, Bernie Sanders didn't flinch. His hands gripped the lectern, his jaw tight, his expression set in the determination of a man who had weathered political storms for decades. The air itself felt charged, as if the entire chamber was holding its breath for what would come next. And in that moment, as Cruz's roar echoed across America, it became clear this was not just a debate, it was war on the Senate floor. The clash did not erupt out of nowhere. The Senate had gathered to debate a sweeping economic relief package, one that carried billions in funding for health care, education, and energy reform. For Democrats, it was a historic opportunity to push through policies that they claimed would reshape the nation for working families. For Republicans, it was yet another example of runaway government spending that threatened to drown the country in debt. Bernie Sanders had taken the floor earlier in the day, speaking with his trademark intensity about the moral obligation to protect the vulnerable. His words painted a picture of America where corporations had too much power and ordinary citizens were left behind. He railed against tax breaks for the wealthy, demanding that billionaires finally pay what he called their fair share. Ted Cruz, listening from his seat, had been growing visibly restless. For him, Sanders was not simply presenting an argument. He was selling what Cruz considered a dangerous fantasy, one that risked bankrupting the nation and eroding personal freedoms. To Cruz, every line Sanders delivered was a provocation, each phrase a reminder of their ideological chasm. As the debate continued, the tension in the chamber thickened. Senators shifted uneasily in their chairs, sensing that the energy in the room was becoming volatile. Reporters whispered that Cruz looked ready to pounce. Sanders, however, pressed on, citing statistics, quoting studies, and building his case with the persistence of a man convinced that history was on his side. Then came the spark. Sanders turned directly toward Cruz and declared that Republican obstruction was not about fiscal responsibility, but about protecting wealthy donors. The words landed like a hammer blow, drawing audible murmurs from the chamber. In that instant, Cruz leaned forward, his hands gripping the desk, his composure cracking. The stage was set. What had begun as policy debate was about to descend into a personal showdown between two of the Senate's most combative figures. America was about to witness not just an argument over numbers and programs, but a raw collision of worldviews played out in front of the entire nation. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Bernie Sanders had accused the Republicans of selling out the American people, and Ted Cruz was no longer willing to sit quietly. He rose from his seat, his voice already carrying the weight of anger before the first words left his mouth. "You're calling us corrupt, Bernie?" Cruz snapped, his tone dripping with fury. "You stand there pretending to be the voice of the people, while every policy you push drives this country deeper into debt and closer to ruin. Don't you dare lecture us on responsibility." The chamber erupted in murmurs. Sanders fired back instantly, his Vermont accent sharp and unwavering. "What I'm saying, Senator, is that billionaires and corporations fund your campaigns while working people are left behind. You scream about debt, but you have no problem handing out tax cuts to the wealthiest Americans. That is corruption, and the American people know it." Cruz slammed his hand on the desk. "That is a lie. You have made a career out of selling false promises. You talk about fairness, but your policies punish hard-working Americans and reward government dependence. It's socialism, plain and simple." Sanders leaned forward, his voice rising. "And what you call socialism, Senator, millions of Americans call justice. Health care, education, living wages, these are not radical ideas. They are basic rights in any civilized society. What you defend is a system rigged for the top 1%. The back and forth grew louder, sharper, each man cutting the other off. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in. Every word was broadcast live, transforming the Senate debate into a televised battlefield. At one point, Cruz pointed his finger across the chamber, his voice thundering. "You want to lecture me about justice? Tell that to the small business owner who can't survive your regulations. Tell that to the families crushed by inflation caused by your reckless spending. You are the reason Americans are suffering." Sanders did not back down. His reply came like a hammer. "Families are suffering because billionaires hoard wealth and politicians like you protect them. You don't care about small businesses, Senator Cruz. You care about donors and power. The American people see through it." Gasps echoed across the chamber. Senators who usually sat in silence were whispering, shifting, exchanging uneasy glances. The temperature in the room was rising with every exchange, and it was clear that the confrontation was spiraling beyond control. Cruz's face flushed red, his voice climbing to a shout. Sanders struck back with equal force, his every sentence met with reactions from the gallery and staffers lining the walls. The chamber had transformed into an arena, with two gladiators locked in combat, neither willing to yield, both determined to land the decisive blow. And yet, the storm was only beginning. The breaking point was still to come. The chamber was no longer a forum of debate. It was a battlefield. Ted Cruz, his voice raw from shouting, leaned forward and delivered the line that would shake the Senate to its core. "You are a fraud, Bernie. A fraud who hides behind slogans while you destroy the very country you claim to love." The roar echoed through the marble halls. Some senators froze in disbelief, others muttered under their breath, while aides rushed to quiet the rising clamor in the gallery. It was no longer just politics. It was an open accusation hurled with venom before the entire nation. Bernie Sanders did not flinch. He stood tall at his lectern, the chamber buzzing around him, and waited until the room began to quiet. His voice, when it came, was not a shout. It was calm, sharp, and deliberate. The contrast to Cruz's fury made every word pierce deeper. "You can scream all you want, Senator," Sanders said, his tone steady as a blade. "But the truth is not shaken by your volume. The truth is that your party takes money from billionaires, writes laws for billionaires, and defends billionaires, while the American people suffer. And no matter how loud you yell, they know it." The silence that followed was electric. For a brief moment, the chamber seemed suspended in time. Cruz's outburst still echoed in the minds of those present, but Sanders' reply cut through it with the force of finality. Reporters were already firing off headlines. Cruz explodes at Sanders, Sanders strikes back. Television networks interrupted their coverage to replay the exchange. On social media, clips spread like wildfire, hashtags erupted, and the moment instantly became a defining flashpoint in the ongoing war between left and right. Some Republicans looked shaken by Cruz's loss of control, while Democrats rallied behind Sanders' poise under fire. Even those outside the political bubble could sense it. This was not just another argument. It was a moment destined to define both men's legacies. And in the center of it all, Cruz's scream and Sanders' quiet retort collided, fury against composure, rage against resolve, leaving the chamber stunned, the nation divided, and the world watching. The storm slowly settled, but the echoes of the clash refused to fade. The Senate chamber, still tense from the eruption, carried the weight of what had just unfolded. Senators shifted back into their seats, but the air was heavy, the kind of silence that follows an explosion. For Ted Cruz, the moment was both a gamble and a risk. His supporters would celebrate the fire. The raw defiance, the image of a fighter unwilling to back down. They would say he exposed Bernie Sanders as the architect of a failed socialist vision. Yet others, even within his own ranks, whispered that he had crossed a line, that his fury had turned into spectacle, undermining the dignity of the chamber. For Bernie Sanders, the exchange became another chapter in his long battle against the political establishment. His calm but cutting words painted him as the steady voice of resistance, unshaken by rage, unwilling to bow to pressure. Progressives hailed his composure as proof that truth doesn't need to scream to be heard. Critics, however, argued that his refusal to match Cruz's fury was weakness disguised as restraint. Outside the chamber, the impact was immediate. News anchors dissected every phrase, every second of footage. Talk shows replayed the moment endlessly. Social media turned the clash into a cultural firestorm, dividing Americans into two camps once again. Those who cheered Cruz's fury and those who admired Sanders' resolve. But beyond the shouting and the headlines, the deeper truth emerged. This was not just about two men. It was about a nation torn in two, a country where the Senate floor mirrored the streets, the workplaces, the dinner tables, places where Americans argued, shouted, and struggled to define what their future should be. The confrontation between Ted Cruz and Bernie Sanders was more than theater. It was a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the fractures of American democracy. And when the shouting stopped, when the cameras finally turned away, the message remained clear. The fight for the soul of the nation was far from over. The Senate chamber had erupted, and America would not forget.